right, let us prepare ourselves. If you put your hand over your eyes, I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
And now over your ears, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
And now over your heart, just extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that you are the author of your experience. You are the author of your experience. Now notice that I did not say that you are the author of your conditions. I didn't say you were the author of your situations or the author of the trespasses that have happened against you. You may be the co-author of some of those things, but you are the singular author of your experience in this life. Today I'm going to begin a little series titled, You Are Not the Boss of Me. And the subtitle is How to Say No to Those Emotions that are competing for control in our life. Because, see, the truth is that there's nobody outside of us that is trying to control us as much as the unrecognized emotions that are inside of us. Emotions that are keeping us from being unexamined emotions that are inside of us, that are keeping us from being the person that God wants us to be on this planet. You know, I've often said this, I've said this a couple of times before to you on Sunday mornings. When I was in seminary, there was a teacher who said to us, every morning when you get up, you have to ask yourself the question, am I going to greet this day with my spiritual magnificence or my unhealed past? Am I going to greet today with my spiritual magnificence or my unhealed past? Because often, especially when the trespasses against us are recent, the disappointments, the betrayals against us are recent, the negative emotions become the prime filter through which we see everything and everybody on the planet. Those are negative emotions like fear and anger and guilt and disappointment. They are the ones that become the boss of us. You know, we're great independent people, we new thoughters. We people who are metaphysicians. We never want to think anybody else is bossing us around. And the truth is, nobody else is bossing us around. It's our own emotional state that's bossing us around. Well, today, much of the material that I'm taking is from the work of a Christian named Andy Stanley. And Andy Stanley wrote a little poem about this very issue, and it goes like this. Our need for supervision may someday come to an end if we silence the toxic voices that come from within. Our need for supervision may someday come to an end if we can silence the voices that come from within. See, the truth is, all of us, we don't get into trouble by taking advice from people out there. We get in trouble from taking our own advice in this planet. And our own advice that's filtered through those negative emotions become our distorted reality in our life. It's sort of like when people say, why did you do that? And you get all defensive and you think of some reasons and you shout them back at them. And then you go home and you think, why did I do that? What was I thinking? You were thinking with negative emotions. So the question is, how do we say no to these negative emotions? How do we allow them to stop bossing us around? By learning how to monitor our insides better. By learning how to monitor our insides better. By becoming aware of what those negative emotions are that are inside of us. We actually are very good at monitoring our outsides, you and I. We monitor our outside. You know, when you go on a date and you like the date, you want to go on a second date, you begin to monitor your behavior, don't you? You monitor your outside. You go to a job and interview and you think, I want this job. You begin to monitor your behavior in that interview. You get in the job interview, I don't want this job. You begin to monitor your behavior inside that job. You want to lose 10 pounds before your daughter's wedding, you begin to monitor your behavior before the wedding. We're very good at that. Monitoring what's in our hearts. that space where our emotions live, that space where our bosses reside, we're not as good at. We need spiritual practice at it. We need to understand that what is in our heart is so very important, because what is in our heart becomes what is on the outside eventually. It'll slip out, even if we don't think it will. You know, Jesus has some help for us in just kind of anchoring this whole idea of what's in our heart is so important. You know, he's with his guys. Now, those of you who didn't grow up Christian, or if you grew up Catholic like me, and you didn't learn a lot about the New Testament, let me tell you that the disciples were Jesus's fans. They were the fans of Jesus. His apostles were his interns. Those were the guys that were closest to him. Now, the Bible tells us a lie. They say that there were 12 apostles. There weren't 12 apostles, there were 13. There were 12 guys and Mary. So we want to always remember. So what happens is this. Matthew, who is one of the apostles that Jesus had, was a little different than the rest because he was very wealthy. He was wealthy enough to be able to have scribes. He hired scribes. And so what Bible scholars tell us is these scribes that Matthew hired, they wrote down what he did while he was doing it. So Bible scholars say the Gospels of Matthew are really pretty fresh Gospels. Anyway, going on. Matthew goes up to Jesus one day and he says, Jesus, the Pharisees are coming from Jerusalem. And Bible scholars tell us that whenever the phrase, the Pharisees are coming from Jerusalem, it's code. And it's code to say, Jesus, Pharisees are coming and they want to set you up. They want to see if you can't make a mistake here. So sure enough, they get him when he's in front of his fans, the disciples, and they say to him, Jesus, why is it that your apostles don't follow the ancient tradition, the traditional laws of our culture? And Jesus says, what do you mean? He says they don't wash their hands before they eat. Now, right now, in this culture, at this time, we would say, oh, that's gross. He didn't wash his hands before they ate. But during that time, the time of Jesus, and this is what makes Jesus so special. He saw the big picture of things. He didn't get caught up in the weeds. He saw the big picture of things. And he said to them, look, water is so precious right now. We're not just going to be pouring it over anything and everything all of the time. We're going to keep it, we're going to be careful with it. He said, and besides which, this law you talk about of washing your hands before every meal to keep you clean so that the dietary laws are kept, those are unwritten rules. Those are unwritten laws that you have made up. And only a few of you know what it actually even means. It seems to me, Pharisees, that what you do with your unwritten laws is when it suits you, you drag them out. But you don't pay attention to the big laws. The big laws like honor your father and your mother, or love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the ones. You're hypocrites, he tells them. You're hypocrites. He said Jesus wasn't petty. Then Jesus quotes Isaiah from the Old Testament. And Isaiah says this, these people, meaning the ancient Israelites, these people honor me with their lips, but they're far apart from me with their heart. They play the game that only they can win. And here's what he said. Then Jesus says this next. He says, what goes into their mouth does not defile them. And how it goes into their mouth, if it goes in by accident or from unwashed hands, does not defile them. What comes out of their mouth defiles them. See, he wasn't having any of it. He saw the bigger picture in the life. He said, yeah, we don't have a petty God. We don't have a small God. We have a big God. Not worried about that kind of stuff. So this is kind of a subtext. I don't even know why I threw this in, but I felt called to do it, so I'm going to do it. And that is this. What Jesus told me in that, what I think he's saying to every clergy person on the planet is this. If any clergy person of any tradition tells you that a ritual will make God happy, run. Because rituals are important. And be careful here, because Jesus was born a Jew, lived an observant Jew, and died a Jew. Christianity came afterwards. He followed the laws that he could. But he was careful to make sure that whatever laws he was following, the bigger laws are what pleased God in this life. He was saying, look, rituals, which are important, don't please God. They help us to receive God more. The only point of a ritual is to put us in a conscious state that God is about to download for us. God is about to talk to us. It's about our receivership, not about making God happy on this planet. When I first got into recovery, I was asked to pray on my knees. The reason wasn't because God liked prayer better from people on their knees. God didn't answer prayer better if you were on your knees, or sitting in a chair, or standing up, or laying prone. God answered all the prayers the same way. It's about receivership. It put me into a place of humility, which allowed me to be more open in our life. Now let's get back to the actual point of this talk, which is how to monitor our heart and let Spirit be our boss instead of our emotions. So in this series, I'm going to talk about the emotion that I think a lot of us have a lot of the time, called guilt. In this series, I'm going to go into some other ones, maybe fear and anger and envy and some other lovely ones. But today I'm going to just stay on guilt. Guilt is that emotion that is associated with the acknowledgement that we did something wrong. Guilt is the emotion that is associated with the acknowledgement that we did something wrong, and there are different kinds of guilt. There's false guilt, for instance. False guilt is that guilt that you actually didn't do anything wrong, but you've taken responsibility for it. You think you're guilty for it. For instance, I've met with clients who had parents divorce when they were young children, and they thought they caused that divorce, and they had guilt over their behavior during that time because they think that's why their father left their mother. That's false guilt. We're not going to talk about that kind of guilt today, but we're going to talk about the kind of guilt that you actually did something wrong. You hurt somebody. And after you hurt that person, you began to rehearse it over and over again. And if we're not careful, then it becomes the boss of us. It becomes how we begin to define ourselves. What you did was so bad in that season. What you did in that relationship was so bad. What you did in that job was so bad. Whatever. So whenever that happens, we begin to acknowledge it, and then we do something. When it looms up, we stuff it. And it looms up again, and we stuff it back down. And then we do the same thing. All of us do the same thing. We create a narrative that allows us to carry that guilt without very much pain in our life. And the narrative goes a little bit like this. Well, it wasn't just me, Well, I was only 20. All right, I was 25, but I was in my 20s. Well, it was my first job. Well, my father did it, my grandfather did it, my brother does it now. I never learned any better. Those are the kind of narratives that we do, and they distance ourselves from actually feeling the guilt, from bringing it up for healing in our life. We suppress it, we excuse it, we deny it, and whenever we deny guilt, it always empowers us. It empowers the guilt, it empowers it, and it throws us off balance in our relationships, and it becomes the boss of us. And here's why. Because when we're in a guilty situation, we've just created a debt-debtor relationship. Whenever we commit a crime or an offense against somebody else for which we feel guilty, we acknowledge the guilt in ourselves. We took something from them. We stole something from them. Maybe we stole our children's childhood. Maybe we stole time. Maybe we stole self-esteem. Maybe we stole money. Maybe we stole our reputation. And now we owe them. We're in a debt-debtor relationship. In fact, we even have terminology for it. We say, I owe that person an apology in our life. I need to give something back that I've taken. But, there are some things you can't take back. You can't give back. You can't give a childhood back. You can't give time back. You can't give self-esteem back in our life. You can't give that husband back that you took. See, we don't experience guilt. And by that time, they don't want them anyway. But we don't experience guilt as debt. We experience it as weight. And the weight is what throws us off balance. In fact, some of us have so much unresolved guilt in our life that we're still operating on it. We're so unbalanced that we're either over-parenting or we're too permissive of parents. We're either timid in our relationship or we're aggressive in our relationship because we're responding to something in our past. Your ability to forgive, your ability to love becomes off balance in this debt-debtor relationship. And again, we have terminology for it. Whenever we can resolve that guilt, whenever we can bring it up and deal with that guilt, don't we say, a great weight has been lifted off of me. But here's the trick. We carry guilt everywhere we go. You may have picked up your weight of your guilt from when you were in college, but then you took it with you to the next season. You may have picked it up at work, but you brought it to home in your life. And there's really a good reason that we suppress this guilt. Actually, it's very smart of us to try and suppress this guilt. It doesn't work, but I understand why we do it. We suppress the guilt because we feel condemned when we're guilty. And that's a terrible feeling. We feel like we're bad people when we feel guilty. There's no recourse. There's no way to undo our past. You can't go back and be a freshman. You can't go back and undo. You can't go back and unsay. You can't go back and unwork. You can't go back and undrink in your life. So again, we create a narrative. Except we can't do it because it's part of our story. Our guilt is part of who we are. It's part of our story. It's why Bill and Dr. Bob tell us in recovery, don't regret your past nor wish to shut the door on it. Bring it up for a good looking at it in our life. Well, here's the good news, and I'm sure I've depressed you by now, so doubtful you came to church to be depressed. So let's look at the good news, why you came to church. You don't have to be defined by your past. You do not have to be defined by your past. But you do have to do something, and that is begin to learn the spiritual teachings of this church. And one of those spiritual principles is, principle is never bound by precedent. God does not care what you did a nanosecond ago. God only cares what you are doing right now. Now that doesn't let you off the hook of doing a verbal or living amends in your life. If there's somebody you need to say you're sorry to, go out and say you're sorry to, and watch that weight be lifted off of you. Watch that debtor relationship just dissolve before your very eyes. But ultimately know this, we should meditate, ponder, cogitate, contemplate, do whatever it is we have to do on this simple spiritual truth. Principle is never bound by precedent. And the principle is you are whole, perfect, and complete just as you are right now. We don't have to rely on that. We don't have to keep stuffing it down. When it looms it up, greet it and say, hello, I see now you are the boss of me. No more, you're not the boss of me, guilt, anymore. I'm going to look at you. And then I'm going to apply this spiritual principle that says, I'm whole, perfect, and complete. I am a good person. I am a loving person. I am a person that the world wants to be here right now. And when we can begin to see that of ourselves, we'll begin to see that of other people in our lives. Let's take this message into prayer. There's only one power. It's the power of love. And if we allow it to run through us, then that becomes the boss of us. Love. And we're able to write songs about a brother we don't even understand. We're able to greet people who irk the heck out of us. Because love is who we are. That's the boss of us. Spirit. I give thanks for that. I release this word in the law, and together we say, and so it is.